the prevalence and the number of SLT users by WHO region. If you look at the region, you can see on the left hand you have the Southeast Asia with the largest chunk, and on the global you have only 346 billion you have people consuming SLT. But out of that, about 297 billion are in Southeast Asian region. And similarly, even the prevalence is actually much higher in Southeast Asian region compared to many other parts of the world. If you closely look at the Southeast Asian region, you see that three countries, India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, together accounts for more than 70% of the SLTs used in the Southeast Asian region. In fact, India alone, with the 206 million SLT users, accounts for more than 60% of the SLT users in the whole world. So, when you talk about the SLT issue in the traditional market, just talking about India and Bangladesh alone covers the large portion of the whole SLT market. And that's the reason why my talk today focuses more on issues on SLT taxation only in India and Bangladesh. But of course, you will get a more global picture from Dr. Nigar after my talk. Prevalence and number of SLT users by World Bank country income group shows how both the prevalence and the number of users actually decline as you go from lower income countries to higher income countries. You will see that the lower and lower middle income countries relatively have much larger number of people, as well as the larger proportion of people using SLT products compared to higher and upper middle income countries. If you look at the gender discrepancy between genders for SLT prevalence, you see that when you actually see this, especially in the context of India and few other Southeast Asian countries where there's huge discrepancy in smoking between men and women, you notice that the kind of discrepancy that you see for smoking between men and women is not seen in the case of SLT. In the case of India, for example, I'm going to show that in a few slides below. But the point I want to make here is that although you see that the prevalence among men are higher compared to prevalence among women, I would see if you compare similar figures for cigarettes, you will see that this discrepancy between gender is much less for SLT than cigarettes, for example. And this is the slide I was talking about. So this shows the change in prevalence and number of SLT users in India across two GARDS surveys conducted over the last 7 years. The first one was 2009-10, and the second GARDS report released very recently for 2016-17 data clearly shows a substantial reduction in prevalence of SLT in the overall population. You see almost a 17% relative reduction in prevalence of SLT. And you also see the discrepancy in SLT use between males and females. As you can see, the prevalence among males is certainly higher than females. When males' prevalence is about 29.6%, it's only 12.8% among females. But if you actually compare the same prevalence for cigarette, you will see that it's not even comparable. The smoking prevalence among females is largely insignificant in India compared to the prevalence you would see for smoking cigarettes among men. Okay. So here, my objective is to show the top 10 high burden SLT states in India based on the two GATs. So as you can see, I have listed 10 states in India, all of them having at least 30% or more adult prevalence of SLT use. As you can see here, although the SLT prevalence has significantly reduced between two GATS rounds, you see that there are some high burden states like Tripura, Manipur, and Assam, which has actually experienced an increase in SLT prevalence during the two GATS surveys. Unlike few other states like Nagaland, Chhattisgarh, or Jharkhand, for example, which has considerably reduced prevalence of SLT use between the two rounds of GATS. But I have also have another slide which actually shows the best performers, I call. The states with more than 20% relative reduction in prevalence in India. So there are 10 of these states, actually 11, I guess, which has shown considerable reduction in prevalence of SLT use in the last 7-year period. In fact, state like Sikkim, for example, has a prevalence reduction of more than 60%, almost 60% reduction in SLT prevalence over the 7-year period of 2 GAT surveys, followed by Andhra Pradesh with nearly 50% decline. I've shown data for up to 20% relative reduction in SLT prevalence between 2 surveys. So there are only 11 of these states in India which has shown at least 20% or more relative decline in SLT prevalence among adults between the 2 GAT surveys. Now, let me move to Bangladesh. If you look at, we don't have the new GATS results from Bangladesh as yet, but we do have data from different ITC studies, ITC surveys, which are also pretty large representative surveys covering a larger part of the country. So you can see even Bangladesh over the period 2009 and 2012 has experienced considerable reduction in SLT prevalence among adults, going down from 28.6% to 22%. You also see similar reduction in both males and females. The case of Bangladesh is a bit interesting here in the sense that this is one of the few countries where the prevalence of SLT use is larger among females than males. In most other countries, you see the other way around. You see male prevalence being larger, but there are only very few countries. I think maybe our neighboring country, Nepal, is probably one other country where female prevalence is large. I may be wrong, but if I remember correct, that was the case. For Bangladesh, clearly, we have very higher proportion of female prevalence of SLT use compared to males. Although in both cases, you see reduction in prevalence over a 3-4 year period here for the 2 different ITC surveys. When you talk about production of SLT, as I already mentioned, 91.3% of the SLT products sold worldwide are sold in traditional markets. And in India, if you see, 18.7% of the tobacco produced in India is destined for making SLT products. So, which means only a smaller portion of the whole of tobacco produced is actually going for SLT production as such. The gross value added, which is a measure to look at the performance of the growth performance, has actually declined by about 23% during 2011, the 10-year period for SLT industry in India. So the gross value added has been declining for SLT. And then if you actually look at the share of unregistered manufacturing in total SLT manufacturing, it increased from 3% to 11% during the same time. So you see that the number of unregistered manufacturing sector, their share has been actually increasing. So this is actually worrisome because the more informal sector increases, it becomes even more difficult for the government to track them or even impose taxation on these companies. There may be a lot more tax evasion potential going on with increase in the share of unregistered manufacturing. Here is a table which shows the employment in SLT manufacturing in India. On the left side, you have different type of SLT products produced in the country. And on the middle column actually shows the number of employees employed in the manufacturing of these products. And on the right-hand side, you have the percentage of this manufacturing employment as percentage of the total employment in SLT manufacturing. So you can see the pan masala and related products accounts for about 65% of the entire SLT manufacturing in India. And 22% of SLT manufacturing employment is from chewing tobacco and other products. But if you look at a large picture, you see that out of the total employment in SLT, the total employment in SLT manufacturing is only 1.4% of the entire tobacco manufacturing employment in the country. Okay, so the tobacco as a proportion of the tobacco manufacturing employment, SLT manufacturing employment is only 1.37%. So it's like it's really very small when you talk about employment figures. In fact, the tobacco employment itself, if you look at it as a percentage of the overall employment in the country, is less than 2%. It's about 1.6% or so. So as such, the employment intensity is pretty low. In fact, the SLT products are not too labor intensive, because much of the labor, much of the activities in SLT manufacturing is with the respect, packaging and done by machines. So it's not really a labor intensive activity as such. Now, let us, before going into the discussion on taxation of SLT, let's actually look at how price responsive SLT products are. There has been a lot of studies on the price responsiveness, or we call economists call it price elasticity, or the rate at which a product responds to price increases, or the rate at which the consumers respond to price increases. And that's what we call price elasticity. Or formally, if you define, we say percentage increase in consumption divided by percentage increase in price is what price elasticity stands for. A systematic review of tobacco control policies on SLT use in USA actually shows that price elasticity of SLT products lie mostly in the inelastic range. Am I audible to people?
Sir, you are audible, sir. Please continue.
Okay, all right. Okay, I thought I saw some disruption on my screen, so I just wanted to make sure. All right. Okay, so there has been a systematic review of tobacco control policies, and according to these reviews, it says the price elasticity of SLT products lie mostly in the inelastic range. Inelastic range meaning the elasticity is less than 1. What does it mean? Let's say for every 10% increase in price, the SLT consumption would decline by less than 10%, but it still declines, but the decline is actually less than proportionate. That is what we call inelastic range. So SLT taxes are an effective tool in reducing tobacco use. So these studies, they confirm that smokeless tobacco products do respond to changes in price, although that response is less than proportional, but it still responds. It means if you can use public policies to increase the price of SLT products, it will see the effect of declining consumption, although at a lesser proportion than the increase in price itself. If you look at the actual figures, we have estimates from India for SLTs. Price elasticity for SLTs in India ranges from -0.1 to -0.9. So there's a range of studies out there, but they are all showing price elasticity is less than 1, which meaning largely inelastic or at the inelastic range. Bangladesh, on the other hand, we have estimates showing price elasticities of SLTs between -0.4 to -0.6, again on the relatively inelastic range. But it all means that the SLT products are responding to price increases, although less than proportionately. From Bangladesh, we also have cross-price elasticity estimates, which essentially shows how, for example, when the price of SLT increases, how does that affect changes in consumption of cigarettes? Or, for example, when the price of cigarette increases, how does that affect consumption of zarda? That is what cross-price elasticity is about. And from the data from Bangladesh actually shows that zarda and cigarettes are substitutes. It means when the price of cigarette increases, the consumption of Zarda might go up, unless you see a corresponding increase or a commensurate increase in the price of Zarda. In fact, we have empirical evidence from Bangladesh, in fact, suggesting the same thing, a study done by our speaker, Dr. Nargis. Different GARD surveys in India and ITC surveys in Bangladesh actually show significant reduction in prevalence of SLT use in the general adult population, as you've already discussed. And you can see that there has been significant tax increases on SLT products also occurred during the same period in both these countries. And I will be actually discussing the way taxes have changed in these countries during the period. Now, this particular graph actually tells you the price and tax burden of SLTs by different country income group. The line graph shows you the total tax on SLT as a proportion of the retail price of SLT. So we have a standard 20-gram pack of SLT selected on the x-axis you have, sorry, on the y-axis on the left side. So so it shows that in higher income countries, the tax burden or the total taxes as percentage of the retail price of SLT is relatively larger compared to lower and lower middle income countries. Where in lower income countries, when it is only when the tax constitute only 18% of the total retail price of smokeless tobacco product, in a high income country on average, it accounts for almost 42% of the total retail price. So there is a direct relationship you can see here. As you go to higher and higher income countries, you see tax as a proportion of the price going up for SLTs. Similarly, you also see the retail prices going up. So in countries where where the tax constitute a larger proportion of SLT, you also see the unit price of SLTs typically tend to be higher. So you see relatively much larger unit price for SLTs in higher income countries compared to lower income countries where the price of SLT unit price is really very low. So this is an important thing to keep in mind when designing policies. So we also saw that the prevalence is lower in lower income countries. Sorry, the prevalence is higher in low income countries. So and this coincides with the fact that the tax as a share of as a share of the total price is also lower in low income countries. And on the other hand, we saw that the prevalence of SLT use is relatively lower in higher income countries, where you also see the tax of SLT as a proportion of the total price is higher in higher income countries. So you actually see a direct correlation here. Now you compare the same picture with what happens for cigarettes, for example. Again, you will see on average across the country income groups, you will see that tax as a percentage of total price is much larger for cigarettes than SLT in all country income groups we have considered. So when, for example, in high income countries, when total tax constitute almost 67% of the total price for cigarettes, the same is only 42% in case of SLT. And similarly, you see a large discrepancy in the tax burden between cigarettes and SLT products in every other country income groups you see. In commensurate with this, you also see larger deviation between unit price of cigarettes and unit price of SLTs in different country income groups. So these are take-home messages for fiscal policies on smokeless tobacco that one has to take from this presentation. Now let us look into a bit more detail on the taxation of SLT in Bangladesh. Historically, there has not been any SLT taxes in Bangladesh, but SLT was brought under the tobacco control mechanism for the first time in 2008 with a 15% VAT on Zarda and Gul, which is an oral powder in Bangladesh. But a 10% supplementary duty was introduced in 2009, and it was actually revised several times in the later years, and currently it stands at 100%. Health developments, there is also a health development surcharge from the year 2014-15 onwards imposed on the supplementary duty actually. So But so far, till the last financial year, the tax base for calculating these taxes were ex-factory prices, which is actually far less than the retail prices that the manufacturers typically would charge. So that would typically lead to a very low tax burden. But from financial year 2018-19 onwards, the tax base has shifted from ex-factory price to a predetermined tariff value. So this actually has the effect of increasing the taxes. And I should actually congratulate my co-presenter today, Dr. Nigar, for her, she and her team has been behind this for the last several years. And we clearly see that their efforts have been paid off. So they deserve a special applause for this effort. The National Board of Revenue actually collects tax from only 20 SLT manufacturers in Bangladesh. So it means there are quite a large number of SLT manufacturers who still do not come into the tax net in Bangladesh, and they need to be brought under the tax net. So this graph actually shows a breakdown of different taxes as of the financial year 2018-19. You can see the blue shows the tariff value fixed by the Ministry of Finance in advance for both Zarda and Gul. And then once it is fixed, then you have a 100% supplementary duty imposed on top of that. And then there is a 15% VAT imposed on the supplementary duty included price. So the VAT is charged on the entire tariff value plus supplementary duty. And then you also have a health development surcharge. So, but now I don't have the profit margin added to it. So if you add the profit, so basically this just gives the tax structure. So now once this is there, the manufacturers are, allowed to charge, impose any, fix any retail price as they feel, depending on the price margin they want to charge. So the idea is that this kind of a system would essentially lead to larger prices, which will eventually lead to reduced consumption. Taxation of SLT in India, now it follows a compounded levy scheme or a presumptive taxation. So in India, government actually used this system till GST to impose excise tax on SLT. So according to this system, the manufacturer pays a duty on the basis of a normative assessment of the production capacity of the machines installed in the factory of every manufacturer. So this system has been followed for many years, but it has been misused by many by way of underreporting the production capacity of the machine, etc. So to correct some of these problems in 2015-16, the government of India in its budget also made maximum speed of the packing machine as a factor for determining both the deemed production and the excise duty payable. So as a result, you will see that the tax revenue has actually shot up from SLT products from 2015-16 financial year onwards in India. But in India, from financial year 2017-18, we have a new system called Goods and Service Taxation, which, so according to this GST, now the excise has been subsumed into the GST. So there's no more excise, it's only GST. At present, the structure of GST on SLT is as follows. Suppose you start with a producer price of 30 rupees per pack of 100 grams of SLT. This is just a hypothetical figure. There's something called a national calamity contingent duty, which is 10%, which is imposed on this. And then there is a standard 28% GST that is applied on the SLT products. Apart from the 28% GST and the national calamity contingent duty, there is also a compensation cess, which actually varies from product to product. At the average of the compensation cess works out around 104%. So the price without the profit margin in this kind of a setup would become about 76.5 rupees per pack of 100 gram of SLT. Anyway, I think I'm slightly running short of the time. So this is just a sample snapshot of how the compounded levy scheme worked in India prior to GST. Now that it is no more relevant, let me skip this. This graph actually shows how the tax revenues, especially the excise revenue, has shot up from the period 2015-16, from the time when the speed of the packing machine was factored in for calculating excise taxes. So it really impacted an increase in excise revenue collection. This table simply shows the different GST and compensation cess rates that are prevailing for various SLT products in India at the moment. So let me just skip that. This is pretty much my last, maybe the penultimate slide, I think. The affordability of SLT products. A major objective of taxing tobacco products is to make them less affordable. So if a particular taxation, whatever taxation you use, if it is not able to make the products or the SLT products less affordable, it's really not meeting its target. Because we already saw that SLT products users respond to increases in price. When the prices increase, they do reduce their consumption. So if they have to reduce their consumption, we have to impose taxes such a way that that these products actually become more, product becomes less affordable over time. So there's this concept called relative income price, which is used in the literature to measure the changes in affordability. Loosely speaking, it is the percentage of per capita income needed to purchase 100 pack of a given SLT or cigarette pack. So based on this particular measure, there has been estimates of how the relative income price or affordability has moved for different country income groups. Cigarettes are becoming less affordable in high income countries and much more affordable in lower income countries and lower middle income countries, according to this RIP measure that I just talked about. But when it comes to SLT, the picture is somewhat mixed. In the case of India, we see that the SLT products have become more affordable over the period 2001 to 2012. There are two different studies, both of them saying that the SLT products have become more affordable over these periods in India. Whereas when you see similar studies from Bangladesh, it shows the affordability of SLT products have remained unchanged between 2011 to 2015. So you see a somewhat mixed picture here, but there is no study clearly showing an increase in, a reduction in affordability in clear terms. That is not been happening. From Bangladesh, in fact, you see a growth in affordability of cigarettes relative to SLT may have induced switching from SLT use to cigarette smoking, resulting in higher prevalence of cigarette smoking and lower prevalence of SLT use. So I'm just going to end with a few recommendations for taxation on SLT products. The first one being revise the taxes frequently, at least once a year, to keep the affordability low. So keeping the affordability low should be one of the main objectives. So when there is general price level increasing, when there is people's per capita income increasing on a regular basis, we have to raise taxes at least once a year so as to account for the increased income, increased per capita income, and increased price levels in the country. That is the only way to keep the affordability low. Tax should not make the SLT products cheaper than the alternative tobacco products available, such as cigarettes. And this is especially true for countries where cigarettes and SLT use are largely substitutable to each other. In the case of Bangladesh, for example, where they are substitutes, as you already saw. So in such countries where they are substitutes, you have to increase the price of all these products simultaneously, otherwise it can defeat the purpose of increasing tax on only one product. Minimum price per pack of SLT should be at least as high as pack of an alternative smoked tobacco products available in the same market. So you should not have a situation where a typical unit of an SLT pouch is available at a much cheaper rate compared to a typical unit of a cigarette pack out there. And then the incremental changes in SLT tax need to be much larger than that of cigarettes to bring about parity in taxation and retail price. This is why, because the SLT taxes in comparison to cigarette taxes are already at a lower base. So your incremental changes that is required in SLT taxes should be much larger than incremental changes in cigarette taxation, so that there is some parity or uniformity between taxes on these different tobacco products. And it's also important to set a minimum floor price on all tobacco products, including SLT. So the idea is that the smallest pouch of SLT that is available for a consumer to purchase should have a minimum floor price below which no pouch of such product should be allowed to sell. So that ensures that the consumer should have a certain minimum purchasing power to be able to go and purchase this product. Taxation of SLT products should be geared more towards a specific system instead of an ad valorem system, as the former has better impact on reducing consumption. So with that, I'm ending my talk today, and I have given some references. I would be glad to share the slides of today's talk with the host NICPR team, and they would be able to share it with the participants if they are interested. So thank you everyone for listening. So I will now hand it over to Dr. Nargis.
Thank you, Dr. Rijo, for speaking on the taxation. Ma'am, over to you.
Hello, Dr. Rijo. I think that was a very comprehensive presentation, and now, and I'm sure there'll be questions which maybe we can answer after Dr. Nigar's presentation. So I'm handing over the mic to Dr. Nigar Nargis for her presentation on taxation and pricing of smokeless tobacco products. Dr. Nigar.
Thank you. Greetings to all participants in the webinar today. I am Nigar Nargis, Scientific Director of Economic and Health Policy Research in American Cancer Society. I would like to take this opportunity to thank WHO HCTC Knowledge Hub for inviting me to speak in this webinar on taxation and pricing of smokeless tobacco products. And as my colleague, Dr. Rijo, has already mentioned, I will go beyond the Southeast Asia region and shed some light on the experience in other countries. You have by now already got this message that tobacco taxation is the single most effective and cost-effective tobacco control measure. The relationships are very straightforward, and I want to summarize what Dr. Rijo has already explained, that if tobacco taxes are increased sufficiently, those selling tobacco products will need to increase prices to stay in the business. And when prices increase more than income growth in real terms, they become less affordable, so that consumers will buy less of them. Tobacco taxation can be even more effective when implemented within a comprehensive tobacco control program that includes other tobacco control measures such as smoke-free laws, packaging and labeling provisions, marketing bans, and cessation programs. In my presentation, I would cover tobacco taxation and pricing issues specific to smokeless tobacco products and how it relates to taxation and pricing of cigarettes in particular. In order to present and contrast evidence of smokeless tobacco taxation, I have focused on two countries, United States and Canada. Although these two countries are not among the largest consumers of smokeless tobacco in the world, these countries have applied tax and price policies to control smokeless tobacco use for a long time, and it allows us to learn from their experience about the long-term effectiveness of SLT tax and price increases. I would also cover the effectiveness of smokeless tobacco taxation and pricing policies in view of the WHO FCTC Article 6 guidelines, especially in relation to tax parity or differentiation, tax structure, and tax administration. To start with the evidence from Canada, you can see that this shows a clear inverse relationship between consumption of smokeless tobacco products and the price. On the left-hand side, we have shown the retail sales volume for 1,000 persons. And on the right-hand side, we have shown the price per 20 gram. This is a typical demand relationship in response to price increases. And smokeless tobacco is no exception to that. Now, when we look at the experience in the United States, it's the other way around. We see that price is increasing and also smokeless tobacco consumption is increasing. So what is going on? Now we compare the trend in cigarette and smokeless tobacco consumption. We see that in Canada, both are decreasing over time. Whereas in the US, cigarette consumption is decreasing and smokeless tobacco consumption is going up. So this leads us to ask two pertinent questions. Doesn't price increase always lead to decrease in consumption? And how do we explain this paradox? Let's see what is happening in Canada. In this graph, we see the average prices of cigarettes per 20 sticks and of smokeless tobacco per 20 gram to make it equivalent in terms of the tobacco content. And we show the price differential between cigarette and smokeless tobacco. The prices are adjusted for inflation and are expressed in 2017 Canadian dollars. Here we see that cigarettes price decreased first from 2003 to 2008, and then it increased slowly. Between 2003 and 2017, there is an overall increase in cigarette price by 10%. At the same time, smokeless tobacco price increased by 50%. So comparing the graphs for smokeless tobacco and cigarette, it is clear that smokeless tobacco drives higher price, and the price gap with cigarette has increased over time. In the US, in contrast, we see that cigarette price is higher than smokeless tobacco price. And the increase between 2003 and 2017 was much larger for cigarettes, which is 110%, compared to increase in smokeless tobacco price, which was 50%. As a result, the price differential of cigarettes over smokeless tobacco also increased over time. So what do we see from the two countries? Smokeless tobacco costs more than cigarettes in Canada, and it became more expensive relative to cigarettes over time. In the US, in contrast, smokeless tobacco is cheaper than cigarettes and became increasingly cheaper relative to cigarettes over time. What can we draw from these two observations about the decreasing smokeless tobacco consumption in Canada and increasing smokeless tobacco consumption in the US? I would like to draw your attention to an early study in the US by Oshfeld and colleagues. It was published in 1994 in Tobacco Control, where it was shown that there is clear substitutability between cigarettes and SLT. In this slide, we see the price elasticity of smokeless tobacco consumption with respect to smokeless tobacco tax and cigarette tax. As Dr. Rijo has already explained, the elasticity with respect to SLT tax reflects the own elasticity, which is the responsiveness of smokeless tobacco consumption to increase in smokeless tobacco tax. And the elasticity with respect to cigarette tax is the cross price elasticity, which shows the responsiveness of smokeless tobacco in response to cigarette tax increase. Now, in this slide, we show the estimates for all smokeless tobacco products and for snuff and chewing tobacco separately in the US. The negative elasticity with respect to smokeless tobacco tax indicates that when smokeless tobacco tax increases, the consumption of smokeless tobacco will decrease. On the other hand, the elasticity with respect to cigarette tax is positive, indicating that if cigarette tax increases, smokeless tobacco consumption can also increase. This is an evidence of substitutability between smokeless tobacco and cigarette smoking. A major conclusion of this study is that, quote, tax-induced relative price changes could be one factor among the multitude of factors affecting the growth in smokeless tobacco use among youth males in the 1980s, unquote. So the relative price change is a very important factor that can be driving this trend. And even though this study was done much earlier, we can still expect to see this to continue in the recent decade. Now the question is whether this substitutability was also at work in Canada. In this case, it would be reversed because cigarettes became relatively cheaper, and we would expect to see substitution from smokeless tobacco to cigarette smoking. While there is no direct evidence to claim it, we can at the very least state that actual consumption is the outcome of the increases in both SLT and cigarette taxes and prices. What we observe in data is the net effect of these two opposing effects. So the negative effect of the increase in own price and tax would have outweighed the positive effect of the increase in the price and tax of cigarettes. The result is net effect is negative. So we see the reduction in consumption in Canada. An important lesson to draw from this is that the own price of a product needs to increase sufficiently so that it can counteract the effect of the price increase for its substitutes that is available in the market, so that the net result is the reduction in consumption. More recent evidence from the US is, however, mixed. Some studies show complementarity between cigarette and smokeless tobacco, and some studies show no significant relationship. The complementarity between cigarette and smokeless tobacco can be linked to increasing dual usage of cigarette and smokeless tobacco, and that is even more harmful than exclusive smokeless tobacco use, as we already recognize. A more disaggregated analysis of the trend in consumption in smokeless tobacco in the US shows that the increase in smokeless tobacco consumption has been driven by the growth in consumption of dry snuff, while the consumption of chewing tobacco decreased. So there might be a substitution taking place between cigarette and dry snuff, whereas chewing tobacco might be complementary to smoking. Now, we don't want to claim that tax and price are the only determinants of smokeless tobacco consumption. There are multiple non-price factors that could be contributing to the increase in smokeless tobacco consumption in the US. Studies have observed that the aggressive marketing strategies since 2005 of two dominant players, such as Reynolds American and Altria, led to the dramatic increase in advertising expenditures. They used price-based promotions extensively, product innovation through introduction of snus and dissolvable tobacco products, and promotion of smokeless tobacco use in places with smoking bans. We have to factor all these non-price determinants into account when examining the relationship between tax and price increase and smokeless tobacco consumption in a particular setting. Now let us turn to a closer look at the smokeless tax system and the rates that are applied to USA and Canada. The federal excise tax on smokeless tobacco is specific in Canada, which means it is a fixed rate per 50 grams of smokeless tobacco, which is classified under the category of manufactured tobacco. Until 2012, we see that the tax rate was lower for smokeless tobacco than for cigarette. And then in 2013, smokeless tobacco tax overtook cigarette tax with a significant increase by 82% in 1 year. This is an example where smokeless tobacco tax can be higher than cigarette tax. The provincial tax rates in Canada are also specific. In Ontario, we observed that the provincial tax has been the same for smokeless tobacco and cigarettes for many years, and it has increased in the recent past. In British Columbia, the tax rates were similar between cigarettes and other tobacco, called loose tobacco here. This year, the tax rates were increased for both cigarettes and loose tobacco, but it has increased more for loose tobacco, making it higher than cigarettes. In Manitoba province, we also observed much higher tax rate for fine cut tobacco compared to cigarettes. So it appears that the tax rates in Canada for non-cigarette tobacco products are no less than cigarette tax, both at the federal and provincial level. In the US, on the other hand, federal excise tax is much higher than smokeless tobacco excise tax. For example, for cigarettes, the tax rate is $1 per pack of 20 sticks. For smokeless tobacco, the equivalent tax rate is 6 cents for moist snuff and 2 cents for chewing tobacco. The bill that was called Tobacco Excise Tax and Parity Act of 2017 proposed a significant increase in the tax rate on smokeless tobacco products, which would make this equal to or much closer to the tax rate for cigarette. And you can see in the third column in this slide, the proposed tax rates for smokeless tobacco. There is also wide variation in the state and local tax rates and tax structures for smokeless tobacco in the US. The current, the timing for this presentation doesn't allow us to get into the details of those tax rates, but we can summarize from the studies that were done for cigarettes. These studies have used state-level variation in tax rates to explain state-wise variation in cigarette sales. They also observed that the differential tax rates across states can encourage tax avoidance behavior among tobacco users through cross-border shopping. And they conclude that uniformity in tax rates can minimize this type of tax avoidance behavior and make it tobacco taxation more effective for controlling tobacco use. It applies to smokeless tobacco use as well. So the recent debate centers on the principles of tax rate differentiation versus parity across smoked and smokeless tobacco products. And this is from the perspective of reduction in overall tobacco-induced harms. At the individual level, as we have already learned that smokeless tobacco use can contribute to oral cancer, esophageal cancer, pancreatic cancer, and even cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, or birth defects. At the population level, overall harm can be reduced if adults use smokeless tobacco to quit smoking, and youth use smokeless tobacco instead of initiating smoking. However, overall harm can increase if dual use is encouraged, dual use of smokeless tobacco and combustible tobacco, and SLT works as a gateway to smoking among youth. For high SLT burden countries such as India and Bangladesh, where a larger number of people use smokeless tobacco than smoking, lower tax and price of smokeless tobacco products compared to smoked tobacco products can encourage smokeless tobacco consumption even further, both through substitution and initiation among youth. Combined with widespread dual use and the gateway effect on youth, overall harm is likely to increase in these countries following the increase in smokeless tobacco consumption. So it seems that tax parity is a sensible policy choice for these countries. Besides, smokeless tobacco products in these countries are typically not strictly regulated for disclosure of the product content, and they may prove to be even more harmful than cigarettes or other smoked tobacco products. In these circumstances, even higher tax rate for smokeless tobacco products can be justifiable. WHO FCTC Article 6 guidelines made very clear recommendation for the implementation of tax and price policies applicable to all tobacco products, including smokeless tobacco. I'm going to reiterate those recommendations here. Quote, all tobacco products should be taxed in a comparable way as appropriate, in particular where the risk of substitution exists, unquote. And we have already seen the evidence from USA, and also Dr. Rijo has pointed to the evidence from Bangladesh that there is some risk of substitution in these countries. Parties should ensure that the tax systems are designed in a way that minimizes the incentives for users to shift to cheaper products in the same product category or to cheaper product categories as a response to tax or retail price increases or other related market effects. Now, in the context of the recent tax policy change for smokeless tobacco in Bangladesh, I would like to point out that they have made one positive move in terms of shifting the tax base from producer price to a predetermined tariff value, which is expected to increase the retail price significantly. But at the same time, they have created two tax rates for two different products, Jarda and Gul. So they have created two tiers instead of one tier that existed in the past. They need to simplify the tax system so that it doesn't encourage substitution from Jorda to Gul, which has lower tax rate and lower price. And they have to bring parity between the two products. So it is not only about the parity between smoked and smokeless tobacco, they also have to consider parity between the products, the smokeless tobacco products. And the third recommendation is that in particular, the tax burden on all tobacco products should be regularly reviewed and if necessary increased, and where appropriate be similar. There are also more specific recommendations about tax structure and tax increases. I don't want to get into the details. Dr. Rijo has already covered that a specific tax system is preferred than an ad valorem system. And in certain circumstances, a mixed excise system with a minimum specific tax floor can be preferred. The tax rates should be monitored, increased, and adjusted on a regular basis, preferably annually. And it should take into account the inflation and income growth so that the affordability of smokeless tobacco products doesn't go down. As a matter of fact, the affordability of tobacco products doesn't go up. As a matter of fact, the tax policies should target to benchmark the tax increases with the reduction in affordability over time, so that it has a negative impact on the consumption of smokeless tobacco. Article 6 guidelines also have strong recommendations for an effective and efficient tax administration. And this can vary from country to country. We have already seen in Dr. Rijo's presentation that the challenge of effective tax administration in countries like India and Bangladesh is that a large part of the production of smokeless tobacco is taking place in the informal sector. In Bangladesh, there is a huge cottage-based industry, and this industry is almost completely beyond the tax net of the National Board of Revenue. Since they collect a very small proportion of the total tax revenue from smokeless tobacco, they are not very interested in spending a lot for the monitoring and enforcement of tax policy for smokeless tobacco in particular. So the caveat here is that they would have the incentive to enforce smokeless tobacco tax policies strictly for smokeless tobacco products if they see significant revenue gain coming from the increase in taxes. And that's what happened in this fiscal year through the advocacy of different partners working for tobacco tax increases in Bangladesh. They perceived that there will be large revenue gain from the increases in tax, and which would possibly give them more freedom for the enforcement and monitoring of smokeless tobacco tax policies in the country. Nice that increase the effectiveness of price measure.
Dr. Nargis, Hello.
Trade in tobacco products.
Dr.
Hello?
Nargis, sorry to interrupt, but your voice is breaking. Hello. Dr. Nargis, can you hear me? Dr. Nargis, we cannot hear you. Your voice is breaking. Okay, Dr. Nargis has left. She's here.
You see my screen, or I should share it again?
Dr. Nargis, we can hear you now. Please share your screen. Yes, please continue, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat this. This is my final slide.
Ma'am, full
It
screen.
is recognized by now that illicit trade in tobacco products increases the accessibility and affordability of tobacco products and undermines the effectiveness of tax and price measures. Countries are therefore urged to ratify the protocol to eliminate illicit trade in tobacco products to WHO FCTC. The protocol is going to enter into force in September this year. Implementation of the measures to eliminate illicit trade will enable governments to raise tobacco taxes effectively, reduce tobacco consumption, and increase tax revenue by avoiding the unintended increase in illicit trade in tobacco products. And this applies to smokeless tobacco products as well. Given the proximity of the high burden countries in Southeast Asia, the smokeless tobacco products can easily be subject to cross-border trade and smuggling. So while designing the domestic tax policies for smokeless tobacco control, countries should also bear in mind that there is need for regional harmonization of tax rates and regional collaboration for designing national level tax rates and tax systems. So that's all from my side. Thank you all for listening to my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nargis.
Thank you, Professor Nargis and Professor John, for this great presentation and taking us through the smokeless tobacco taxation issues. I'll just while Chandan at the Secretariat is trying to get questions from the participants, and the other participants are, in terms of gearing up for their questions. I have just one question for Rijo, and it is relating to the Indian context. Since we are now getting into GST, and so under GST, there's a it's not that it is going to an annual increase, and we are dependent on the GST Council's decision on different issues. And the taxes under GST, tobacco is taxed at 28, but the input items, let's say if you are making a smokeless tobacco product and you are using lime and you are using other things, so those are tax exempt or maybe not taxed. How do we, in terms of deal with such kind of a situation under the GST regime? So what are the, let's say, we are going to have a national consultation in a couple of days, exactly a week later. So, how would you position the best policy for or under GST for SLT taxes?
Yeah. Good question, Amit. Actually, I'm sorry to disappoint you that I don't really have a ready answer for that. I wish I had. But you're right that, although there is a 28% GST slapped on SLTs, there are a lot of inputs that goes into the production of SLT, many of which are actually taxed much lower, or some of them even exempted. So, Yeah, I think as a consultation, once we have a consultation, we should be able to propose at least the major ingredients that goes into the production of some of the main SLT brands should be brought under a higher taxation regime within GST. And we, as a result of the consultation, I think the consultation should be able to propose something like that to the GST Council. That is all I can say at the moment.
Yeah, linked to this, like I was also thinking, Rijo, when we talk about pricing also, and maybe Dr. Nigar can give her inputs also. When we talk about tobacco products pricing, I think Rijo and Dr. Nigar has also worked on costing, so which is the health cost of tobacco products. Now, when you are pricing these products and taxing these products, the price of getting a pack of cigarette shouldn't that be also included, the cost that we are incurring as a health cost? Because one cigarette that someone smoke, or a bunch of smokeless tobacco that someone uses, the price is not only the price tag that we see here, but also the cost that the society and the individuals and their families are in terms of they are paying. So shouldn't that also be included into the cost or the price of these products? So your thoughts on that?
I mean, certainly when you estimate the cost, see, I have done estimation on economic cost of tobacco, wherein I have done estimates separately for smoked and smokeless tobacco products. But of course, it is also possible to derive these costs separately for these products. I mean, at least for smokeless products alone, you can derive a cost estimate. That is perfectly possible. But when it comes to pricing, of course, changes in price of one product can also be impacted by the prices slapped on other products. That was evident from our presentation so far, especially in Bangladesh and few other countries where the substitution is an issue. But in the Indian context, I can tell you that there are a couple of studies on price and on and cross price elasticities estimated in India over the last a decade or so. There are 2 or 3 studies that come to my mind. But there has not been any conclusive evidence to suggest that SLT and other smoke products are substitutes to each other. In fact, the cross price elasticities that we see from the Indian studies are statistically insignificant. But that's an Indian case, but we have countering evidence from Bangladesh and other parts of the world. So yes, I mean, in India, I wouldn't worry much about the cross price effects. I mean, you know that in India, mostly these products cater to different class of people or people from different socio-economic groups. I mean, if they have to actually substitute, they should very well be substituting now, because actually there is huge price variation between, say, for example, cigarettes and some of the SLT products. And you should be seeing the substitution already, but that's really not happening.
Right. Dr. Nigar, any inputs you have?
Yeah, I think to respond to your question about including the cost of purchasing the tobacco products, into the total estimate of cost of tobacco use, I completely agree with the idea that actually the purchasing cost is generally seen as an opportunity cost for the consumers, because they could have used that money for purchasing other commodities or the basic necessities. And this is more relevant for lower income people who would be actually taking away the money from the basic necessities and will be depriving those needs for other family members. So definitely that imposes significant cost on the needs of the family with respect to all types of expenditures. Now, whether we should add that to the health cost or not, that's a different question, because the price that consumers pay is actually derived as a benefit to some other actors in the market, such as those who are working in tobacco manufacturing or in tobacco farming. They are receiving their wages out of that price, or the profit that the tobacco industry is gaining out of that price. or the revenue that the government is getting out of that price. So these are the benefit side of tobacco consumption. And you will see that tobacco industry uses this argument for counteracting the tobacco control policies. So that's why we don't want to mix up these two. We want to show that the cost, the exclusive cost that tobacco users incur from tobacco use doesn't create any benefit to society, okay? On the other hand, we show that the benefit that tobacco industry claims coming from tobacco sector is much smaller than what the consumers are incurring in terms of the harms to their health. So that's why we don't add those two.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nigar. But I think I am looking at a possibility when we could say that if the cost of using tobacco, or the burden of the real cost of using tobacco in India, as per 2011 prices, is 1,400,000 crore, 4,000 crore, which translates to about $22.4 billion. So if you translate that to the cost, as if you're talking about opportunity cost of a wage earner or opportunity cost of someone else, or the profits of the industry, so you'd also look at the losses that the society is incurring, and trying to say that the cigarette, after taxation and all, which costs, let's say, X amount of dollars, or X amount of dollars, it should cost plus whatever the cost which it comes to one cigarette, and so which would, I think, phenomenal price that someone will have to pay to use one cigarette. Because if you look at other products, like where you have to recycle products, or where you have to dispose certain kind of products, you pay for those using those products. The cost of in terms of disposing them, and then the cost of having those products, you are paying for it. While in tobacco, you are not paying for the adverse outcomes that this product gets to, and which is known. So that was the argument, and I think that could be a good area for us.
That's a usual rationale for imposing taxes on any tobacco products, because the consumers of these products are unaware of the various external costs that they impose on the society on account of their consumption. And that's the reason we say that the government should intervene in the market of tobacco products, because it's not a free market with full information to all. Even its own consumers do not have full information on the products they consume. So that is the reason we suggest an imposition of tax, and the expectation is that that tax is actually going to reduce the consumption and bring the actual consumption equivalent to the desired level of consumption that the society desires. That's the whole idea behind taxation. Of course, you're right that maybe the current level of taxation really do not capture the full extent of the cost that these products actually impose on the society, and that is a genuine reason why the taxes should go even further. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Rijo. Is there any participants who have questions for Dr. Rijo and Dr. Nigar?
No, sir, we haven't received any questions for the speakers.
So either nobody understood it, or we were too good.
That's another way of looking at it.
I think everybody is, it's quite evident what the answer is for that.
Yeah.
You were really good.
Oh, yes, of course.
So thank you, Rijo, and thank you, Dr. Nigar, for giving us your time in the morning and late in the evening from your homes, and for this interactive session, and getting this debate on smokeless tobacco taxation in terms of globally from this knowledge hub. We are sure we'll take this forward from the consultations we are having, and we had the inter-country meeting last year in August, and we have recommendations from there, and while looking at specific in terms of developments across different parties to the FCTC, we hope that we would be able to get this message to other countries as well. We will definitely share your presentations. I think that's okay with both of you,
Sure.
with the participants and other stakeholders, the country focal points for tobacco control in different parties. And thank you for your time, and we look forward to having further interactions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Amit. Thank you, Dr. Nigar. Thank you, Dr. Rijo sir, for participating.
Thank you.
And all the participants, thank you so much for joining us today. This is Secretariat Knowledge Hub on Smokeless Tobacco, signing off for the day. Thank you, everyone.